Alright, welcome guys. In this video I just kind of want to give a brief introduction to integers and look at performing some of the basic operations using integers. And so first let's just talk about what integers are. Integers are just simply positive and negative whole numbers, and again our numbers are infinite here, but just a small sample of integers is -12, -2, 0, 1, 2, 100, and 10,000. So any number that's a whole number, whether it's positive or negative, falls under the integer category. And so some examples that may not or that do not fall under the integer category would just be 3.7, 3/4, -1/2. Just any number that is not a whole number, positive or negative, are not integers. Alright, so this is just a real quick brief introduction to what are integers and what are not integers. And so now what I want us to do is go ahead and let's look at performing the basic operations, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, involving integers. Alright, so here I have just two basic easy examples that deal with adding, subtracting, positive integers, and usually these are pretty easy for us, so let's just go ahead and knock these two out. The first one's 4 plus 3. I think we all know that that's just 7. And then the second one, 5 minus 2, again, I think we hopefully know that's just 3. And so anytime you deal with positive integers, it's relatively easy. What we run into a problem is when we throw in negative integers. And so let's look at some examples that involve negative integers now. Alright, so here I have two more examples. The first one is we have 4 plus a -3. And so here we're adding a negative number to our positive number, and when we do that, it really turns out to be a subtraction problem. So this is really could be written as 4 minus 3, which is just 1. So 4 plus -3 is just equal to 1. Right? And then the second one, instead of adding a negative number, now we're subtracting a negative number. And when you subtract a negative number, you really are adding. And what happens is this minus, anytime you have a minus back to back like that, it's going to turn positive. So we really have 4 plus 3 in this case, which we saw from the first example that 4 plus 3 is just 7. Alright, so when you have a positive plus a negative, you're really subtracting. Then when you have a positive minus a negative, you're really adding. Alright, so last two examples I want us to look at. Let's see what happens when both our numbers are negative. Alright, so here we have our last two examples for adding and subtracting, and we see that in this case both numbers are negative. And so with the first example, when you add two negative numbers, you just add them as if they're regular numbers. So 4 plus 3 is just 7. But since they're both negative, you carry that sign over, and so you get -7. So adding two negative numbers really isn't that bad. Just add the numbers again as if they're just regular whole positive integers, and then just carry your negative sign with them. Alright, now the second example, we have -4 minus a -3. And we just saw in the example above that anytime I have minus and negative, that turns positive. So we really have -4 plus 3. And so now that there's a couple ways you could do this. One way is to kind of treat it like money. Anytime you have a negative number, think of you as owing somebody money. So you owe somebody $4, but then you only have 3. And so if you give them that 3, well, you still owe them 1. So -4 plus 3 is -1. Another way of doing it is just taking the absolute value of each number and subtracting those. So remember, the absolute value is just the distance from 0 and that number. And so the absolute value of -4 would just be +4. The absolute value of 3 is just 3. So take the absolute value of each number, subtracting that, we get 1, and then take the sign of your largest number. And so if we look at our two numbers, 4 and 3, well, 4 is larger and its sign is negative, so this has to be a -1. And so that's really two different ways that you can approach these. Also, using a number line could be very useful to you on determining which way to move and how to move according to whether it's positive or negative numbers. Alright, next let's look at multiplying integers. Alright, so here we have 4 different problems that deal with multiplying integers. And so if you look at the problems, it's just a mix. Multiplying positive numbers together, multiplying negative numbers together, multiplying positive and negative numbers together. And so when it comes to multiplying integers, we really just want to multiply the numbers as if they were just regular positive integers. And then we will worry about the signs at the end after we got our answer. And so 2 times 10, well, that's just 20. Okay, and what we see is anytime you multiply two positive integers, you get a positive number. So if I multiply a positive times a positive, then I'm going to get a positive as my answer. Alright, the next one, we do negative 3 times 5, and so what we get there is we get a negative 15. And so what we see there is anytime I multiply a negative times a positive, I'm going to get a negative answer. Alright, next one, 4 times negative 4, well that's negative 16. And so anytime I multiply a positive times a negative, again I'm going to get a negative answer. And then the last one is negative 2 times negative 3, well that's positive 6. And what we see there is if I multiply a negative number times a negative number, I get a positive number. Okay, and so really the trick is when multiplying integers, if the two signs are the same, then your answer is positive. If the two signs are different, then your answer is negative. And so that's just kind of your short trick of remembering your sign, whether it should be positive or negative, when multiplying integers. Alright, now last, let's finish up with dividing integers. Alright, and so now finishing up with dividing integers, what we see with their signs is the same as multiplying integers. A positive divided by positive gives you a positive answer. A negative divided by a negative gives you a positive answer. A positive integer divided by a negative integer gives you a negative answer, and then a negative divided by a positive integer gives you a negative integer. So the same rules apply with multiplying and dividing. If the two signs are the same, your answer should be positive. If the two signs are different, your answer should be negative. And so let's just look at these quick 4 examples. So 24 divided by 3, well that's just positive 8. Negative 16 divided by negative 4, well that's just positive 4. 3 divided by a negative 1, the two signs are different, so my answer has to be negative, so negative 3. And then negative 2 divided by 2, again, the two signs are different, so my answer has to be negative, which is negative 5. Alright, and that's it for dividing integers. So that's our basic operations of adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing with integers. You really want to make sure you pay attention to your signs. That is probably one of the largest mistakes that students make in math, is messing up their signs in a problem. And a small mistake can really affect the outcome of your problem.